Last week's bitter chill reminded us what winter should occasionally feel like around here, and certainly the length of time the Arctic air stuck around was notable. But what about the magnitude of the chill? Well, here's the lowest temperatures last week at the primary observing sites and a few of the typically colder rural ones. The 14 below at Oswego in Potter County was as low as I could find in the state. Now, you might think it's been a while since temperatures were this low, but in reality, at all these places, the last time it was this cold was either January of last year or February of 2011. So last week's chill really wasn't that unusual. In fact, no record lows were broken in Pennsylvania last week. Just to get a sense of how cold it has to be to set a record this time of year, here in white we've plotted the record lows for last Wednesday, which was the coldest day for most of these places. And notice that in almost all cases it wasn't even close. The records are generally 10 to 20 degrees below even the deepest chill from last week. Truth is, extreme chill has been hard to come by in recent decades in Pennsylvania. As an example, let's look at data from Ridgeway in Elk County, a rural location with high-quality data going back to the early 1900s. I will use -10 as a reasonable threshold for what's really cold there and plot the number of days each decade when the temperature got that low. And notice that in the 1980s, 1970s, 60s, and 40s, that kind of chill was much more common than during the last 2 decades. Here's a similar chart for another high-quality observing site a few miles outside of York. Now I'm using 0 degrees as the threshold for extreme cold, simply because we're in the southern part of the state. But the message is really the same. Generally speaking, the last 2 decades have seen relatively few of the extremely cold days. And you see this kind of pattern statewide. Though no low temperature records were broken last week, it was cold enough to produce some unusual weather in western Pennsylvania. Here's the area in question. The key player was a cluster of power plants near Shippingport in Beaver County. And now here's a radar image of that area last Tuesday evening. The radar was in so-called clear air mode, which is very sensitive, so much of this wasn't precipitation, but this east-west oriented band was, and it originated at the power plants. Hot water vapor pouring out of the 5 cooling towers there, mixed with the cold, dry Arctic air, producing a cloud that was blown east by the wind. Tiny particles in the effluent from the towers acted as nuclei on which ice crystals grew large enough to fall as snow in a narrow band about 2 miles wide and 20 miles long. Some places got an inch in about an hour. Essentially, the process that formed the snow is the same one that allows you to see your breath on a cold day. Formally, the cloud is called a mixing cloud. It's not uncommon for clouds like this to form downwind of cooling towers, but it is unusual for them to produce precipitation, especially in Pennsylvania, and even rarer to see it so clearly on radar imagery. Paul Knight is back next with the extended forecast.